Hello, and welcome to the Generation Podcast. I'm Max Rothery, VP of Community here at Finimize, and in this series, I'm going on a mission to learn from the smartest minds changing how financial services engage with modern investors. We're going to uncover real practical advice to help you become better marketers, product builders, and leaders of the new generation of wealth. Today, my guest is Chris Worle. Chris is a former Chief Digital Officer at Hargreaves Lansdown, and now he's Managing Director at Barclays, leading their smart investor platform. Chris spent 19 years at Hargreaves Lansdown and helped take them from a direct mail business to the UK's largest investment platform. At a time when fintechs are focusing on profitability, Chris built a profitable growth engine that is unrivaled in direct consumer investing. And in this episode, Chris shares his advice on how to use content to drive revenue. We'll also spend some time on the importance of down-funnel attribution, getting buy-in for successful digital transformation, and how to always think customer first. So let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Chris. Hey, Chris. Thanks for joining us today.
Morning, afternoon even.
Yeah, good afternoon. Well, I remember 6 years ago when Finimize was just a daily newsletter. You're actually one of the first execs to meet with us. So thank you for taking that meeting, and then thanks for joining us 6 years on.
No problem. It feels like a lifetime ago.
It sure does, especially on our side, and I'm sure given your recent move over to Barclays, it has for you too. What I wanted to touch on, though, is the growth of Hargreaves when you were there. Over your career is almost hard to comprehend. So recent stats are 735 million in revenue, 1.8 million clients. It's a huge business that you saw, grow through the digital transition and digital transformation. What I'm curious at, especially how you're approaching your current role, is how is your background starting out as a marketer and witnessing that digital shift firsthand through your time at Hargreaves shaped how you go about building a digital strategy today?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one I often think about because again, sort of you talk about digital strategy with a lot of people jump straight into the tech side of it. I think what HL had was a real sort of marketing background and marketing discipline within the business, and therefore my background that I built up, it teaches you to really focus on what customers want and need in a real in-depth way, not just behind that classic kind of, well, what the customers want, let's build it for them, but actually really understanding, and it's particularly important in financial services, what are people's thoughts, fears, hopes, dreams for their investments, their ISAs, their pensions, it's their life savings, and what are the things that are on their minds today? What's the thing that they're typing into Google because they've got a question about it or want to understand, and that's the discipline that I think sort of comes through, and the help that I certainly feel that marketing gave me. I think the other thing, if I reflect as well, is also the focus on outcomes. So again, marketing teaches you to measure everything and track what you're getting out of everything. And the same should be true of digital strategy. And if you look at the ones that have lost their way, the transformation strategies that have lost their way along the line, they've been consumed with that sort of big tech build or that big project migration. And I think it's staying true to what's the actual end result that you're trying to get out of this. Is it business growth? Is it customer impact? Is it whatever it is? It's staying focused and staying true to that, really.
Yeah, I love that. A laser focus on the customer as the foundation for your digital strategy.
Yeah, and a lot of companies talk about that customer focus, but embedding that in all of those decision points, embedding that in how your design and product teams think is hugely important.
And how do you do that at a business the size of what you've now taken on at Barclays? So maybe if you could just give a bit of a picture as to the scale of the business, the teams that you lead, and then lead that into how you start creating a digital strategy, a customer first digital strategy.
Yeah. And it's been an interesting transition, because on some metrics, actually, HL from a investment platform perspective, around 1.8 million customers now, is a bigger business, is a bigger platform than Barclays Smart Investor platform, for which I'm now responsible, which has in the region of 250,000 customers. But obviously exists within a much bigger universe and a bigger business as a result. And it does make things easier and challenging in different respects. It's a simpler proposition, so we're using that and to spot those opportunities and just get the teams focused on how do we start solving more problems for more customers. We've got a huge captive audience within Barclays, which was one of the attractions to join Barclays, and that audience needs help starting to invest, starting to get more from their money in the shorter and longer term. So there's a real job for us to do there. And Barclays as a group has got pretty much all the pieces necessary in order to be successful in that space. Many of the banks do, but it's really how they take that proposition to market. Going back to what I said a moment ago, it's how you engage with customers, how you help them on that journey. I always talk about the fact that, look, investing it's not a retail interaction. It's not a decision that people make overnight or instantly when they hit a website. For most people, it's a decision that takes place over weeks, months, sometimes years, from that initial Google search through to actually doing something. To building that engagement machine that builds a relationship with people along that journey is incredibly important.
I love the idea that you're approaching this with the audience needs help. How does that translate into actual strategy that you put in with your team?
The key, where we started with Barclays and Smart Investor, is understanding what are those hurdles, what's not working about the experience, the proposition, that whole package to date. To really understand.
And how did you go about doing that?
Good question. Like there was a lot of research already in the business. Some great people and great teams there that already understood a lot of what the problems were. It's been about sort of packaging that into I think, clearer digital strategy, and plugging that into, obviously, my experience and background from HL and what really works within the market. But there's not a silver bullet. It's not a one size sort of fits all solution. It's not just about throwing money at the problem. You can build the best proposition in the world, but ultimately, unless you've built that engagement machine of thinking about how you bring your customers and those relationships through to that service, you're still not going to deliver. And vice versa, you can have the best marketing machine and engagement strategy in the world, but if you've not got the right proposition for them, and it's therefore fixing those things, but fixing those things in the right order with the right sequencing. So that we just get momentum back in the business and growth back in the business.
Awesome. So you are understanding the customer pain points. You're seeing it from the challenges that they face and how you can overcome them, and then you're looking across that entire funnel of marketing, engagement, and proposition. Do you track metrics to know to keep the team on track and understand that you're achieving those goals?
Yes, and that's a hugely important part. Really, and that's where we spent a lot of time and energy, certainly through the years at HL, building that engagement, conversion modeling, and tracking to the nth degree of the performance throughout the digital channels. And the focus is the same on Barclays. I think the challenge faced there is different. There's a lot of data in the system and Barclays. I think working with teams and people to understand where to use that data, then play back that data to build the case and demonstrate successes, is what we're really focused on now. And I go back to, look, we're not going to go from where we are today to shooting the lights out in the market overnight. So what are those other data points, conversion points, engagement points that are actually going to give us confidence along the way and be able to point to success in the short term?
Do you have a couple of metrics that you check in on every week that you'd call your North Star metrics or the best indicators of the health of what you're trying to build?
I go back to, and I've had to adjust myself to looking at different metrics and what's available. But I go back to like years ago with NHL. This was probably back 2011, 2012, when it was still sort of kind of digital was still finding its ground and what was quite a traditional business back then. And there was still a lot of talk and focus in the business on how busy the phones were, etc., and everything like that. And what we did at the time, we decided to put some screens up in the office that just showed the number of people on the website at that particular time. And that transformed people's thinking and mentality in the business, because people could see and hear previously when the phones were busy and saw the stats on the screens. But all of a sudden, the team could feel it as well, of like, oh my God, there's like 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 people on our website right now, or on the apps looking at things right now. And that is a real heartbeat measure, is extremely impactful, because it just meant that 10:30 you look up and kind of go, oh, it's quiet today, and that would play out in the business figures and everything else that would play through for the rest of the day and the week. So they don't need to be complex metrics. One of the things that we're focused on today is just the account conversion journey, and ensuring that actually where people do decide that they want to open up a Smart Investor account, how are we making that really easy for them? How are we removing all the barriers and issues and errors that they currently might get along the way? So none of these are groundbreaking metrics, and I think that's the challenge. Sometimes it's easy to overcomplicate it, but sometimes it's the simplest ones that are the best.
Well, one of the things that you've certainly done throughout your career, and Hargreaves is known for, is you figured out that engagement machine, that content machine, from digital acquisition all the way through to product adoption and increasing share of wallet. I'm curious how you managed building that content engine at such a scale that actively drove outcomes.
Yeah, and we didn't necessarily sort of jump in. Again, it was very incremental build. I remember back in 2008, I think it was, putting Google Analytics on the website for the first time, and it was just sort of kind of revolutionary. And we just started building from there. But HL had a very big advantage back then around, it's traditionally a direct mail business. So it already spent the previous 10 years creating content. So what we already had in our back pocket then was a whole wealth of content. We then just had to open up the channels to distribute it and test it in different ways. So we were at an advantage to many back in those days. And of course, we started with AdWords, but the rise of the content networks, Outbrain and Taboola, I think we were Taboola's first UK client. So really we had the content ready to go, and it was just about, okay, what networks, what channels can we use to put it in front of as many people as possible, and measure the impact of that. But it really is important to have that test and learn culture and environment within the team. As social channels really took off, for example, we really struggled finding and creating content that worked on Facebook or wherever. And funnily enough, people didn't really want to engage with pensions on Facebook. But I think it goes back to what I said at the start around just finding the right hook and engagement tool for people, because they're still the same people. It's still largely the same. You're talking to the same audiences, albeit with skews to different demographics, etc. It's just finding the right thing that might be on their mind, or the right medium for which they might want to engage at that point. Therefore, is it video? Is it an article, etc.? And that's what we had to test and evolve. But again, we had to, the discipline that HL had in terms of spending and budget was brutal. So every additional pound that I spent, I had to justify and fight for. So that did really drive that discipline of sort of kind of measure everything that we spent. So then over the years that followed was that development of that sort of kind of performance marketing machine, I call it, because it is a sort of kind of now a highly tuned machine.
What I'm fascinated by is you've managed to consistently throughout your career drive the buy-in and adoption of innovation. So if we use the fact that you managed to convince the business first to implement Google Analytics or start spending ad dollars on Taboola and Outbrain and prove that revenue fast enough for the business to continue investing, do you have a framework for how you go about getting that buy-in and how you get new channels off the ground and prove traction quickly?
Yes, I think the approach that I often take where possible is how do you make it as bite-sized as possible? Because it's okay to have the big plans and the big ambitions, but 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have that big check written for you from the outset. So how do you break it down? How do you start small, build momentum, get the data behind you, build some success and some results, and just keep that loop going? And quite often sort of talk about that sort of flywheel effect in growth, sort of build that growth, build confidence, and then keep going from there. And that's really what we did across all the channels through those years. But you get times where, I remember back in, it must have been 2010, where we were, I've got a lot of old stories here, where we were trying to convince people in the business to build a mobile app. And it sounds pretty unbelievable now, but it's easy to forget how immature the market was back then. The App Store had only been around for a year or so, and there were a lot of apps coming to the market. A lot of businesses developing apps that offered a really rubbish experience, but you could just see the conversations in the boardrooms playing out around the world, kind of going with executives going, "We've got to have an app. I want an app. What do you want it to do? Doesn't matter. We've just got to have an app in the App Store." Whereas we at the time took a very different decision, which was, we're probably going to take a little bit longer to get to market, but we want to have an app that actually offers value to customers, that solves a problem, that does something that they're going to want to do. So therefore, it needed to be an app that enabled people to trade in their accounts, view their accounts, etc. I think we were probably the first app where you could view your pension on a mobile app, for example. And we were rewarded as a result. The growth, the reviews, etc., came through.
And at Finimize, we're obsessed with financial content, and we're obsessed with driving outcomes for both the consumer and businesses with financial content. Do you have any examples of what works when it comes to whether it's the acquisition piece, like what's the kind of content that works, but also from an engagement perspective and driving repeat business?
It's a question. I think the challenge the industry faces, and you look at a lot of businesses that try to engage people in investment content, is they start with, we need to educate people. People want to learn about this, and therefore we need to create sort of educational content. People don't want to be educated. People want answers to their questions. People want solutions to their problems. And so it's start with that. That's where I go, and it's kind of back to what I touched on at the start. What are the questions that people have got on their mind? What are the questions that people are typing into Google, YouTube, or whatever channel? And then how do you answer those? And then how do you nudge them on to the next step and nudge them on to the next step? So they're subconsciously being educated. But we have many attempts over the years of where we create these hubs of educational content and learning zones, etc., and stuff, and they rarely, if at all, actually worked or scaled, because I don't believe many people really sort of sit down one day and kind of go, right, I want to learn about X today. People just sort of kind of meander and navigate their way into it.
Yeah, I love that. And we talk a lot about the modern investor, which is almost, just another way of looking at modern consumers. You're competing against Netflix, TikTok, Instagram, busy lives. And to sit someone down and say, before you invest, let me educate you about diversification or compound interest.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I love that you guys landed on that.
Yeah. And again, for years have said where a lot of people should start investing is within a tax efficient wrapper like an ISA and in a diversified fund. In reality, where most people start is opening a trading account and having a punt on an individual share that they've heard about down the pub or that friends told them about. And I think I go back to, we need to get more of the UK public investing and engaging with investing. So I believe it's not about putting blockers in the way of that. It's how you use that initial spark of engagement and interest to then actually go, okay, you've done that. Now think about doing this. Now think about doing this. It's about those tiny steps towards actually creating that good long-term investing behavior.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because at Finimize we find the most engaging content. We always try and write for what we call the community zeitgeist, and it could be a news hook, it could be a stock that they just bought, but using those moments to further then educate, inform, but ultimately empower them to go on their own journey to invest.
Yeah. And I just remind me that the thing that we also found as well through various content tests was people's sort of fears almost were stronger than the sort of ambition. So a article that was top 10 pension mistakes, for example, always did better than top 10 pension tips. So people sort of kind of want to understand the issues that they could fall for as much as more so than the opportunities.
And it's also difficult not to fall into the clickbait trap where every single piece of content you put out is 5 mistakes to look out for when navigating your financial life.
And it's a really good point, because it is really easy to just chase the data, chase that click through rate. But actually you've got to follow it through to the right outcomes. And that was where, again, building that longer term attribution model. So knowing that, okay, if today I get X number of leads through that channel and they engage with that content, it probably will take 18 months to actually get a return on that. But we can say actually with some degree of certainty what return we will get on that over the following 12, 18 months.
That's incredible that you managed to build a sort of scalable demand model using content. What I'd like to, dive into now is, I remember when I was researching you and the interviews that I've listened to you over the years. This was a few years back, but you stated that most fintechs were inflated in value. You had fears that the attention of crypto can lead to consumers getting burned, and you'd seem to be proven right there so far. But you also stated that the battle in the future of fintech will be won and lost on customer experience. Reflecting on that now, do you still stand by that?
Yes, I'm quite glad you didn't ask me for a new prediction today. I'm not going to give you one. I'm not going to give you one of those. Yeah, I think it's that customer experience is more important than ever. I still think it's going to be a huge battleground over years to come. I think if you reflect on sort of like the early thousands were the sort of the web experience battle. Over the last sort of 10 years, that experience battle has very much been within the app space. I think now what we're going to see over the next 10 years is really that consolidation of that experience into sort of super apps and experiences. And if you look at the way, taking Uber as an example, if you look at the way Uber's evolving from just a sort of kind of ride hailing app to now offering flights, trains, etc., it's starting to really consolidate that whole A to B challenge for people through open banking. And open banking is a really interesting one because I don't think it's quite taken hold in the way that people expected it to. I think that's still to come, but it's a slow evolution that will mean for Apple, for example, they're going to start allowing you to be able to see your bank account balances through the wallet app. So all of a sudden you don't need to go to your bank's app to check your balance. So that consolidation of experiences in the market means that it's going to be even more important to not only offer a decent experience, but really figure out what solutions, what problems are you solving for consumers? Because otherwise, a lot of financial services businesses are just going to be increasingly consolidated and commoditized in the background.
Well, I think the bit that resonates with me is sort of your skepticism is really rooted in how hard it is to build relationships with customers when you're dealing with money, which is different to Uber and other consumer verticals that are pivoting between consolidation and fragmentation. So I'm interested in this space at the moment between fintechs and the traditional firms, especially when it comes to wealth management and how that battle is playing out. What is your advice for any fintechs that is trying to build trust with their customers?
It's a real challenge because I still think a lot of the fintechs and the neobanks are really still struggling to get over that hurdle of, well, people are using us, but are they really using us for their financial lives? I think I, along with probably pretty much everyone else in the industry, watch with interest to see how Monzo does when it shifts into the investment space. And it's easy to build a big waiting list, harder to get people to trust you with your money, but also how long they manage to hold that relationship for. Because again, the other behavior that we see quite often in research is that people will use these sort of kind of fintechs and younger investment platforms to get started, and then all of a sudden they get to a balance where it's kind of, oh crikey, I've actually got sort of kind of decent balance with that. I best put this somewhere safe now. And it's not, I'm not saying the others aren't safe, but there's that real psychological barrier. But even with HL, and even it's the same with Barclays. Barclays has got sort of kind of huge brand within financial services. But actually, when you look at the research, less so with investments. So I always talk about confidence, and when customers make that decision to invest, they need to be confident in their decision, and that's quite often a two sort of part thing. That's confidence to choose you and confidence to invest in the first place. You've got to have both of those in order to get them over the line. But broadly, I go back to what we've sort of kind of discussed on and off through this conversation, which is it's about engagement, and it's about, are you there through their decision journey? Are you even sort of kind of there when they do get to that sort of zero moment of truth? And actually, if you've been there sort of helping them and support, you're in there with a much better chance of conversion at that point.
I guess the thing that's hard, because I'm just thinking about my own journey, and I did exactly the same thing. I used the fintech startups as I was saving, building up, saving towards a house. But as soon as I had anything significant or I had a mortgage, went straight over to the large incumbent. The thing that's my journey. But the thing that I think with money is so subjective and personal, that it's not, you can't just show up at the moment when you want to buy a house. You have to build that relationship. But it's different. When I was speaking recently to the head of digital over at Brew and Dolphin, we were discussing how important personalization is when it comes to content and driving that engagement, but also that things like age and wealth and these traditional ways that you segment for personalization are actually terrible indicators of the type of service or the product or the need. How do you go about approaching that? If you're building a product, you might have a digitally savvy 75-year-old drawing down on their pension, or you might have, a younger wealthy exec who likes to come in and have lunch with their wealth manager. How do you start building for a journey that's so diverse, and how does personalization play a role in that for you?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is getting trickier. I think a lot of those demographics are becoming slightly less relevant. They do play a significant role, sort of particularly age. I remember some research we did a number of years ago when I was at HL, which showed people's financial knowledge and experience increases as they get older, through their 20s, 30s, 40s, and even into their 50s. That their financial knowledge continues to increase. However, they get to pretty much 50 and their confidence falls off a cliff. So despite their financial knowledge ultimately being at sort of kind of near peak, their confidence falls off because they get to that point where I think those fears kick in. All of a sudden, they've built up that pension pot, and that they feel like they've got more to lose than they have to gain. Retirement starts to feel a lot closer. So those questions and concerns kick in. But again, for me, it's about, especially if you're trying to build that relationship digitally, it's using the data and insight that you have. And again, people obsess a lot about the demographics, age and wealth, etc. And depending on the business, that can be easy or hard to get. But actually, what we spent a huge amount of time doing at HL was focusing on the behaviors. What are people doing on the site? What are the sections they're looking at? What's the content they're looking at? And that can tell you an awful lot more than what they're thinking about, than where they live and what car they drive and how old they are, and that they're using that. And the other bit that I reflect on is, you look at the likes of SJP, and I know it's kind of, it's popular to bash them, but the thing that a lot of people miss about that is that, and a part of why they've been successful is, on the whole, their clients love them. They love the experience, and that's because they've got people who are building relationships with those customers on the ground, quite again, often weeks, months, years ahead of them actually making a decision. And it's that for that cohort of customers, it's that relationship that people hugely value, and I think many competitors significantly underestimate. charges aside.
I think that's it's such a powerful concept though, because the analogy you're using with St. James's Place is almost your philosophy with content. Is how are you building that relationship, understanding the consumer and customer based on what they're engaging with rather than how old they are or how much money they have, so that you're there ahead of time. If it's cool with you, I've got two more questions and we can then wrap this up. Firstly, we are laser focused at Finimize and have been for years on the impending wealth transformation, the impending wealth transition. So I previously used to work in wealth management, and it was seen as this thing that was off in the distance and was going to come after everyone had retired. However, we're now seeing that £5.5 trillion in the UK that is set to change hands start to shift slowly. And we know that when it comes to wealth, over 60% of people change their wealth manager, which is a huge threat to private banks and wealth management as we know it, but also a massive opportunity for platforms like you have at Barclays, like Hargreaves, and platforms that are set up to cater to these, £50,000 to £500,000 pound accounts. When it comes to this sort of next generation, inheritor generation, are you proactively going after this segment? And do you find that their behaviors differ to their previous generation?
There's undoubtedly a huge opportunity in the market and a huge shift that's going to, or that is already taking place. I see one of the keys to that opportunity is, if I look at our own proposition, if I look at pretty much every proposition in the market, it's still built around the individual. So again, I don't think those individual propositions then really cater to the problems and needs of customers who are now thinking about, actually, okay, what wealth have me and my partner got? How do I pass that down to my kids and grandkids? How do I build a view of that? And I think many banks and investment platforms still, you log into your account, and yes, on some of them you can hop between your family members' accounts relatively easily. But how do I get that view to help that wealth transition come down? And therefore, I think it's also the bit that people underestimate with the younger audience as well, is that influence of that parental generation. I think it goes back to the point you mentioned earlier, which is, where do you go for your mortgage or your big financial sort of things when you do that? It's one of those things where, I know I did, it's like, well, what bank do my parents use, and what have they done? And therefore you do actually mirror those behaviors quite a lot. So I think that's another challenge that those neobanks and startup platforms have, and that's one of the huge advantages we had at HL. But I think certainly outside of that advice world, then there's a lot more that the execution only sort of kind of world could and should be doing to help that wealth transfer happen easily and smoothly, and help people make better longer term decisions when that wealth does come towards them as well.
It also goes to show how long that relationship building journey is. You're talking multi-generational now.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that you mentioned on sort of the acquisition channel of going via your existing relationships to deepen those relationships, is where fintechs are struggling. It's very difficult to convert a wealth account from a Facebook ad.
Yeah.
Just to finish, I actually want to touch on your journey to the C-suite. A lot of people that are going to listen to this podcast are going to, want to be in a similar position to you, or are currently in a similar position to you. What's always fascinating is as you go from sort of operator to leader. So I'd love to understand if there was a moment that you can discuss as the biggest learning experience of your leadership career.
It's a good question. I think I remember going through that transition where, I think it was 2015 when I got promoted to director and executive committee. I didn't really see myself any differently and just sort of kind of largely carried on sort of operating in the way that it did. It just had to attend a few more different meetings. But I think the element that I missed and underestimated was the shift in how others see you and interact with you. So I almost, particularly even with my own team and others have brought onto the team, I had to work even harder to just maintain those relationships and close working relationships and that element of trust, because all of a sudden, although I was their boss before, I'd sort of kind of gone from there to there. So it started just holding back on things. And I suppose the other thing that I reflect on is the importance of the team. I sort of kind of had an incredible journey through, but there were people with me on that journey all the way through, and those people have gone on to do some amazing roles in other businesses today, and that's amazing to see. And I think building that close-knit team that you can trust and they can trust you is incredibly important. And I think the other observation is just that a lot of people focus on size and scale of team. I always found that if you can find the right people with the right attitude and approach, you can go an awful lot further with a team of 3, 4, 5 people than you can with a team of 25 quite often.
Amazing. Well, that's everything for today, Chris. Thanks, as I mentioned at the beginning, thanks for meeting with me 6 years ago, and thanks for coming back and being the first episode of this podcast.
No problem. It's been an absolute pleasure.